And so we start with wholeness. We start with the celebration of what is real and true. And immediately we shift the frequency away from the idea that there is something to fix and change, that this moment is anything less than God's glorious perfection. When we start and rest in the moment with this glorious knowing of the heart, we are open at the frequency of love that can truly invite and welcome everything that is here in the field. So we start with this wholeness. We start in the openness. We start with the glory. And really this is about resting here, resting in the recognition, the remembrance of what is real and true, the knowing of the heart. That in a way, the anchor is the knowing of the heart, which is the presence of being. And so we're opening to the presence of being. It's the being itself that is the freedom, the being itself that is the field of love, of light, of the glory. It's the simple being itself, where there is no one to do anything, and so therefore no one to be afraid, no one to fix and change, no one to reorganize. When we start here now, we are in the immediate recognition of the openness of the presence of the field, the presence of being. And then it is from here, as the witnessing awareness, as the light, the principle of illumination, that we illuminate what may seem to be discordant in the field. That we are operating with the technology of illumination, operating as the light that can see, operating as the light which is aware and yet absolutely untouched by whatever is happening in the field. So the way that we've learned, and the mental perspective, the perspective where there is a sense of division, is to start with the problem and try and solve it. Start with a sense of the me that's trying to measure and evaluate. Am I safe? Am I being seen? What is happening here? What do I need to adjust? What do I need to fix? How do I want to move here, right? So it's a really different way of being to just start. We say start. Essentially, we're speaking of just being here in this moment. So all that is really needed is to just be here and to watch and to recognize. Of course, if we are just resting, there is a peace and an openness in the presence of being. There's a simplicity in the presence of being, and a naturalness in just being. That we're not looking for a state or to create any kind of mood in any way. We are simply being, the being that just is. And the being is not someone. The being is before someone. The being just is. The being is the I am presence, the simple presence, the wide open field. And the being is the heart's knowing of simplicity. So in the resting, we are open to the field. We're open to the glory of the field. We're open to the simplicity and naturalness of just being. And the being is not a divided being that has any personal status. The being is the field itself. The being is the undivided sense of presence that just is. The wide open field of grace. And the being is known by the being itself. The mind cannot know the being. There cannot be any understanding about the being. It's the immediate, eternal, timeless presence. And the timeless presence is an infinite, unbounded field. It's an intimacy with your deep, true nature, an intimacy with yourself, an intimacy with the one wide open field that is the one and only self. And we could also say that the being is the presence of love or the presence of God. It is in the frequency field of being, in the stillness, in the silence, that we open to the deeper, subtler, finer frequencies of remembrance. We open to the resonant field of light, where remembrance happens. That remembrance is in the being. It's the being recognizing its own beingness. Remembering, oh, this is what I am. This beingness is the freedom. It is the knowing of the heart. It is the wildness and openness. It is the deep silence and the dynamic flow of life. The utter simplicity of just being here, where there's nothing to do, nothing to understand, nothing to fix or change, just the simplicity of being. So just resting here in the openness. The glory is that there is nothing to do, nothing to understand. It is the being itself that attunes and aligns with the frequency field of remembrance right here. And as we open and attune and recognize the simplicity of being, it's like a recalibration and reorganization, a deep relaxation into just being here now, a timeless immediacy of now. And an ability here to simply be aware as awareness itself, watching the mind, watching the moving, changing landscape, just as a simple awareness, not invested in it, not trying to interface with it, but just watching, a simple watching. Be open to realize that the silence and the stillness, the stop, is this wide open field of presence. And that the wide open field of presence is naturally free. That if we are to come to recognize the essence, nature, and the oneness of all that is, that it's in the opening, into the presence of being, where there's simplicity and nothing else but being, that brings us to a sense of freedom. A freedom where the power is returned from the sense of the me and the mind. The power is returned to the presence of being. The power is returned to its source. We recognize the source of the being that just is. We recognize that we're not separate and divided, that we're not limited, that we are whole in essence nature. And everything that opens, the widening finer frequencies that are all opening in this field. And so coming to the presence of being and this recognition of the being is the field of truth. It's the field of simplicity. And this field of simplicity offers us this extraordinary possibility to remember and to deepen and open into this wide open field of pure consciousness, and to start to really receive the flow of intelligence of consciousness, start to receive the intelligence of the heart's knowing. Recognize that the flow of intelligence is the flow of knowing the truth of the intelligence that we are, the wisdom that we are, and the wisdom and intelligence of the play of life, and how everything that is dancing on the surface of life as the play of life is only here as a reflection to reveal to us what we would not otherwise see, or to reveal to us a reflection of the glory and the celebration of the heart's knowing. That we're either receiving a reflection of some kind of discordance, or we're receiving the reflection of reality, of the frequency of love. And ultimately, we are within our deepest heart, we are longing to remember. We are longing to rest here and know the true essence nature, longing for the power that feels divided and disparate and limited when there is a prioritizing the sense of the me and the mind. We're longing for this power to be returned to the source of our deepest knowing, so that we are being resourced from the source, so that we're being resourced from that which can truly nourish and illuminate and really open the remembrance of the flow of the field that is abundant and free, that is glorious light, where we have then this capacity to look upon and illuminate anything and everything in the play of life, that the wisdom and intelligence is bringing forward in appearance. We have the capacity as the light, as the aware being, to illuminate and to see. And when we have this capacity to see, just as awareness, it is the power of illumination that actually collapses the patterns of discordance. In a way, it collapses the patterns of discordance from seeming to have a structure that is real. It collapses the patterns of fear and conditioning, and dissolves the sense that there is a structure that is real, into the realization that only the being is real, only love is real. There's only one power, only one thing happening, and that is love. And so as we open to this field, we start to open to the remembrance that there's only one thing happening, and that is love. There is only one truth. And it's not a truth that can be understood. It's not a truth that can be held onto. It's a truth that is a resonant frequency of light. And it's the heart's knowing and the intelligence of the consciousness in its purity that brings the resonance of remembrance. So as we open into alignment and attunement and recognition in the wide open field to the subtle frequencies, and we join in this remembrance, in this frequency field, as we join, there's a sense of relaxation, a sense in the presence of being, in the subtlety of the being, that the being itself knows itself as just being. And it's such an immediate nowness. It's the timeless. And yet at the same time, this timeless is like a wide open, boundless field. It's everywhere. And yet we can still have a recognition of the point. We can recognize the boundlessness. The sense of being is everywhere. And yet the point where there's a sense of the coordinates of the point. And the point is just one point in the infinite field. And the point is like the antenna. It's both receiving and transmitting a frequency. And as we are receiving the frequency, it's like we are mapping and aligning with the frequency. And not in a mental way, but the consciousness is mapping and aligning with the finest frequency that it can possibly find in the field. It starts to attune because the frequency of consciousness recognizes itself. The being knows itself just being. So as the speaking comes and as we are joining here together, as the speaking is here, the frequency field is offering the possibility for the consciousness in the field to map and join and recognize itself, attune with itself, and open to itself at finer and finer frequencies, to move away from being identified with the frequency of mind consciousness that is denser and start to attune intelligently to the frequency of the being, the frequency of the silent presence. That it's the consciousness that starts to reorganize itself. And so that is why in the sense of the lived experience, there's nothing really to do. It's the recognition of the being. But as the words come, the recognition of the being isn't a doing, it's a happening, where the being is just being itself and is silently attuning. It's receiving the transmission as an antenna, and as it receives the transmission as an antenna, it reorganizes, recalibrates, the consciousness comes to a purer, finer frequency. And then as a transmitter, it starts to transmit. We all start to transmit a finer frequency. And the transmission then of the finer frequency in the field starts to recalibrate the whole field. And as the frequency of the whole field of our gathering starts to resonate at finer and finer frequencies, the reverberations are rippling out into the field of consciousness. And the field of consciousness is one wide open field. So the whole field is impacted. And that is why, as we open and refine our own frequency and we live at the finer frequencies and we're open, let's say, as the frequency of love, we're transmitting that frequency. And the transmission of that frequency is affecting the whole in a glorious way. But what it's also inviting is a reflection of that frequency. It's like as we send that frequency out, it gets amplified and comes back. So this is why if we're resonating and living at the frequency of fear and division and separation and doubt, we're sending that frequency out into the field. And then the consciousness, the intelligence is using that frequency to then create a reflection to really show us, this is your frequency. This is where you're living. It's got no agenda or judgment or any kind of narrative with it. It's just reflecting, this is the frequency. And if we are open to receive the grace of that, we open to receive that reflection. And we have then the capacity to either receive the glory of the reflection as a celebration and an amplification of love and light, or we have the capacity to recognize, okay, if there's discordance here, grace is inviting that I receive the reflection of the discordance with the possibility of not reacting and blaming and projecting it away, but actually really receiving that frequency as a reflection of my own fear. It's this realization that it's never about anything outside of ourselves. The whole play of life is a glorious adventure into our own innermost realms of consciousness in order to refine and free the tangles and discordance so we can open and refine the frequency of our lived experience, both to open to a much more magical and glorious lived experience in freedom, in love, and also to naturally in that to be of service to the whole. It's a natural inbuilt function of being a field, is that however we're operating impacts the whole. So when our allegiance is with love and the undivided, then we are serving the whole field, and our frequency is an upliftment to the whole field of consciousness. When we are in a sense of division and fear and doubt, the frequency is making an allegiance with separation, and it's feeding and perpetuating that frequency. So there's something incredibly profound and glorious about opening to this field of being and the possibilities of opening to the infinite field and the magic and the grace and the blessings of this field of light and the incredible intelligence of this field. And that the only way that we can really come to know the one essence of all is by opening through our own inner landscape, through the sense of being, like the cosmic consciousness, the consciousness that is pure and unbounded. We open through the consciousness that is one universal field. And in that universal field of consciousness, we're opening to the intelligence, and in our lived experience, we are refining as a vehicle that impacts the whole. We're moving as one field. And so the more that we can impact the field with a frequency that is refined, subtle, we could even say positive, but by positive, what we mean is let's be clear here. It's the positive nature of this frequency is it's more of an energy signature of positivity. It's the frequency of yes, right? So that's simple, right? Positive, affirmative, yes. Negative, no, right? So it's the difference between like the inclusive, receptive frequency of love, of openness, or that frequency that resists and pushes away and projects and blames and moves in all of those, what we might say again as an energetic field, not as a labeling, but as a more negative, resistant, limited frequency that's fearful and doubting and feels lack and division, right? So we start to feel the energy signatures of the more negative, resistant field of the me and the mind, and that's all about me as a limited island that's divided and looking out for me, that's competitive and comparative and divisive, right? And then we can really start to feel the frequency of the field that is more positive, where the heart is saying yes and is open and receptive and inclusive, right? We start to feel the difference. And as we start to feel the difference, we can also start to feel the contrast. And we can definitely start to feel the affirming, let's say the natural affirmative of the yes field, of the love field, and the light and the openness and the grace and the blessing. We start to feel the flow. And the flow of the field is what refines us. The flow of the field is the grace and the all-inclusive flow of surrender and devotion and yes, right? So you just start to feel it as an attuning frequency, as the antenna that's receiving and attuning. You start to feel yes, 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 I recognize that, and I attune with it. And then there's a natural opening and a deepening and a refinement that's happening in the consciousness itself. And here we're aligning and receiving the grace, and it's a self-fulfilling, deeply nourishing field, right? The field of inclusivity, the field of the holy yes, the field of the glorious, right? The field of light and beauty and celebration. It's flowing within itself. And so as we open to the sense of being, where the being knows itself as just being, the intelligence feels like a knowing. And the knowing is the being knowing itself just being. And there's a sense just of the heart just knows. The being just knows. It's not qualifying itself in things like the mind does, right? The mind qualifies itself with a context and things. The mind has to attach itself to almost like theory or concept or idea or belief. The mind has to identify itself with something that kind of proves it or gives it a stability that it needs to attach itself to something. It needs to stabilize itself in objective experience, right? Whereas the presence of being just doesn't need anything. It's absolutely stable because it's constant, ever present. It never, ever leaves itself. It's a self-sustaining glory, right? So we're just here really just painting a picture of this field where we can recognize these different frequencies, because we have the recognition of what it is to identify in these ways. And of course, the deepest longing of the heart is to not identify with division and opposition and resistance and fear and doubt and limitation and lack. That we're longing to be absolutely identified with God, with love, right? We want to be celebrating in constant revelation of our identity in eternal God. We want to be open as a celebratory field of grace, a field that is glorious and miraculous, right? Of course, that's the longing of the heart, because that's the true nature, and we remember it, right? We've never left this truth. We've never left home. We've never left reality. And yet the mind imagines within that limitation that there's some kind of division or apartness, that it's possible to be apart from God, from the glory, from the revelatory field. But the heart knows, the being knows, that just is not a possibility, right? It doesn't need to reference anything. It doesn't need to confirm itself in things, because it's self-sustaining in its devotion and surrender and its knowing. It's a field of self-confirming, stabilizing within itself and its beauty. And then the glory is that here now, as the speaking is coming, the speaking is the field speaking to itself. So in our joining, what is happening is that as each being, let's say, here in our gathering, deepens in, the speaking is more in a more refined way, reflecting and offering a transmission of the field that every heart's knowing can recognize as the truth of your own experience, that you're not receiving a teaching, you're not receiving something that you don't already know. And that's the incredible profundity of transmission, the field of transmission, is that you're only ever receiving a transmission of what you already are transmitting, right? You know this, you already know this. And so what happens is that in the field of transmission, you're not finding out something that is new. You're not having a new experience. You're actually clearing the clouds and fog of experience to actually experience yourself in your naturalness. You're actually experiencing yourself as true nature, as essence nature. You're experiencing yourself as the field of being. And so the beauty is that as you start to feel and resonate in a deeper recognition, you start to feel the resonance, the frequency vibration refining, and you start being able to confirm in your heart's knowing, yes, yes, yes. And sometimes things will be spoken that just don't really make sense, and it doesn't matter. You don't need to hang on to the words or try to understand. In a way, just being completely open and receptive, and just allowing the revelation of your own recognition, your own recognizing to happen in whichever way it comes. To not have any expectations, to not need it to look a certain way, to not want anything or desire anything or have any kind of sense of how it should be, and just absolutely be here and know that the true being that you are is hearing itself, receiving itself in the listening field, in the field of grace. And whatever your experience is, there's magic happening. And that's the beauty of the field of grace, is that it's pure magic always. And it's the kind of magic that is not hocus pocus, right? It's not like hocus pocus, illusory kind of magic. It's the kind of magic that is revelatory. It's the kind of magic that removes veils. It sees through illusions. It sees through the mind's fixations. And it sees through in these magical ways that are not through understanding, belief, or gathering more information, but just in the ways of, oh, here I am. Who knew, right? Here I am, just being. That things just start to dissolve and untangle in the field of consciousness. And it's not about trying to fix anything, change anything. It's this open receptivity that offers the glorious possibility of just receiving the frequency of your own wholeness. That you are perfect right here now. You are beauty right here now. That you are open as a field of infinite possibility. You're here as a field of love, of a holy yes that is never opposing itself, that is in absolute constant surrender into itself as an undivided wholeness that has never ever left itself. So even the idea of, oh, I've been living in separation or division or protection or conditioning, nothing that we have an idea that we've been living has ever actually divided wholeness. And that's the glorious revelation of this truth, is that love has never left. Wholeness has never been divided. And so that's why in the field, we could say the quantum field, the revelation is immediate. The revelation is now. The revelation is timeless, ecstatic, mystical, and glorious, right? It's not mysterious. It's mystical. The mystical revelation is the revelation of pure surrender, of pure devotion, a pure ecstatic flow of what the heart already knows. And as the heart is surrendered into itself, in the knowing of itself, there's a revealing of love, a revealing that love is here, that love is abundant, that love is without condition, that love is full and free and glorious, and love loves you all the way through, all the way through. That there's nothing that you have done or could ever do that has ever divided you from love. And so this unfolding is revelatory. It's not a process of fixing yourself. It's not a process of changing yourself. It's not a process of preparing yourself or making yourself better or more worthy of God, of the glory. It's about recognizing that right now, great glory, the revelation is you are a child of God. You are belonging to God. And the revelation of this light of God is already here right now in the heart's knowing. And it's this openness to receive the absolute glorious revelation of the eternal God, which is this almost like this channel of the here now eternal, right? It's not about the past and creating a future from the past. It's not about looping dynamics of time and space. It's not about fixing and changing. It's not about fear or improving. It's about receiving the revelation here now, boom, right? Receiving the revelation of what your heart already knows. Receiving the glory of God. And the glory of God is, of course, not a concept or a belief in some kind of entity. It's actually the receiving of the silent presence. It's receiving the pure frequency, the frequency of perfection, of wholeness, the frequency of the undivided field, the frequency of the universal, right? It's so amazing because it's right here now, and you don't have to work for it, and you don't have to understand. It's just about attuning and in the openness, just receiving and aligning with, receiving the transmission field. And the transmission field is where you're receiving and picking up in consciousness and as consciousness the frequency of what you intelligently recognize as a truth that you already know, right? Your nervous system is consciousness. Your nervous system is a very refined system. It's not a personal system. It's not even an embodied system, right? Although the physical has sensors, let's say, of the nervous system of consciousness. But the true nervous system is the field of consciousness. It's a universal nervous system. It's a universal feeling, sensing field. And it's absolutely wired to sense and feel and pick up the subtlety of the fine frequency of pure consciousness, right? So we don't want to play small, just trying to pick up the frequencies of limitation. We don't even want to play small, picking up the frequencies of necessarily only the somatic field, right? We want to be wider. We want to be wider, more open, so that we're actually picking up the frequency field of pure consciousness, because it's in the frequency field of pure consciousness of love that true transformation happens. Boom, right? So here we are as the discordant, that which feels limited. Now we can become very adept at feeling this. Ooh, yes, right? We can become very adept at feeling this and opening to be able to feel this. But without the presence of pure consciousness, this has got no guidance. It doesn't have a guiding light. It needs the guiding light within our internal functioning in order to be guided to realize that this, as it's feeling itself, if it's feeling itself and it's feeling itself, it's having a lot of feelings, but it isn't able to fully release that feeling field into the essence nature. It knows its true nature, but it needs the frequency that reminds it, right? If it doesn't have the frequency that reminds it, it just keeps dancing around in the field of limited consciousness, trying to find itself. It's like it's swimming around the pool, looking for its mother, right? Swimming around the pool, looking for its true nature, because it has a sense of it. And it's doing its best, it's well-intentioned, and it's feeling and it's feeling and it's feeling, but it's not actually fully transmuting, right? The feeling, sensing field has to be open more widely to the sensing of the subtle body, where the being knows itself and where the nervous system is resonating as pure consciousness. Because then this that's feeling itself is being illuminated, and the feeling field, the sensing field, sensing itself as pure consciousness, where the feelings are coming forward, the feeling field now has a guiding light. It's found its mother. It knows its source, and it knows what to, in a way, let's say it knows how to be mirrored in its true nature. And when it's mirrored in true nature, it pops open and sees, haha, there I am, here I am, wow, here's the beauty, here's the love that I am, right? Because if it doesn't have a mirror that's mirroring true nature, if it doesn't have a frequency that's really showing it, this is what you are. And this has to, of course, can only naturally be the frequency of wholeness, has no agenda, no judgment, no opinion. It's pure love, pure, perfect love frequency, pure and open, illuminating. And so as this feeling field is feeling itself, which we could call the somatic field where we have this capacity to feel and be present with what we're experiencing in the nervous system. And that's profound because we've learned not to feel. So as we open to be able to feel the somatic field, it's profound. But if we're only feeling and feeling without the frequency within our inner landscape of the mother frequency, the frequency of wholeness, this doesn't have the guidance to truly remember and be mirrored into, where the transmutation happens. And where transmutation happens, true healing happens. And there's an absolute disappearance of the discordant frequency. Boom. It's just not there anymore, right? It comes home. It remembers. This remembers, oh, I'm not these shapes that I'm taking. I'm not these stories. What I am is love. I'm not the fear. I'm not the doubt. I'm not the lack and the limitation. I'm not the guilt and the shame. I'm not the unconscious debt of the karmic storehouse, right? What I am, boom, is love, right? It's immediate, right? When the frequency of love is present, boom, when the light is here and shining, this just opens and remembers, wow. And it's like the light shines. The light of consciousness shines into the unconscious, illuminates what feel like shadow frequency, and illuminate that shadow isn't something that you have to process. That shadow just needs to be illuminated as light. Boom, it's done. Freedom is here, right? And so then as we open to this recognition, this recognizing, and the recognizing is the remembrance of the intelligence of what we actually are, the wisdom, the amazingness of what we actually are, that we're opening and opening to remember. And as we open and open to remember, we open to the intelligence of what we are, and we start to have the capacity within our own functioning to function in this way that we're speaking of, right? So the transmission of the field and the wisdom of the field brings forward what the intelligence of your heart already knows, of your consciousness already knows as a field. We all start to attune to it at whatever capacity we have, and then open and refine to what we're ready to receive and how ready we are to open to a greater capacity. And all the while, the frequency field is refining the nervous system and the consciousness to be able to open and have the capacity, the subtlety, the refinement to open to the infinite field of possibility, the field of grace and magic. And in that, we start functioning. Our whole functioning starts to shift and get upgraded, right? That we start functioning more at the frequency of love and wholeness. We start functioning at the frequency of the glory, right? And then we're in this revelatory field where there's this joy and this delight, this awe and wonder of the revelatory field, the celebratory field, where we know that everything is grace, that there's only grace. And then our functioning is in this field of the yes, the non-opposing, inclusive field of yes, of an affirming, positive frequency, right? That's in self-surrender and pure devotion and just flowing within its own wholeness in this incredibly beautiful way that is constantly confirming itself within its self-sustaining mechanism of integrity, right? It's a self-sustaining mechanism that is integral, and it keeps its integrity its integral wholeness through surrender to itself, just in absolute surrender and awe of itself, in absolute loving devotion to itself, just bowing to itself, just in absolute unbridled, unabandoned prostration to itself, right? And that pure devotion keeps the integrity of wholeness whole. It's what has in eternity, it's the eternal momentum of integral wholeness, right? And so we join in this field of integral eternal wholeness, where there's this brilliance, right? This radiance, this brilliance of our own shining illumination, the principle of illumination, right? It's the principle of illumination ever shining radiantly, right? It's one field. Do you see what's happening now? How the field is just, it's speaking to itself and it's bringing in exactly what it's speaking to itself. It's in the immediacy of now. It's amplifying itself, right? It's the true process of sanyama, right? Sanyama is whatever's being spoken in the field gets amplified and it comes back. This is the affirming, positive field of self-surrender, of self-devotion, right? Whatever you put in, whatever you're absolutely saying yes to, whatever song you're singing, it just comes back to you in waves of bliss and ecstatic rapture, whatever capacity your system can deal with, right? It might not feel like what you expect bliss, rapture, and ecstatic gorgeousness to feel like to start with, but it will feel like waves or a recognition, a deepening of the knowing. And what we would say here is, if you just start to feel more, you might feel just more alive or more joyful or a little bit giddy or a little bit just like you want to laugh. You might feel even a sense of more tension, because as the field is moving to purify and refine itself, it pushes the tensions forward. It pushes everything to try to clear and purify, right? So it's gorgeous. It's absolutely glorious. And it's just about receiving the frequency of your knowing in the way that your heart is transmitting and receiving as an antenna, and transmitting and receiving as an antenna, because that is the same flow of surrender, of devotion. And then we bring it right to the surface of life in our lived experience. And then our lived experience is that when we recognize that life is flowing within itself and that it's a field of grace, whatever happens in the human life, as we are receptive to it and as we receive it and we open to it, instead of resisting and pushing it away, again, we're joining with that flow of surrender. We're joining with the integral flow, because that flow is multidimensional. It's happening multi-frequency, multidimensional in our the fullness of our lived experience, right on the surface of life, in our subtle body and in the realms of light and light body, right? It's and let's say too in the sense of the bliss body, it's absolutely the whole frequency field that we're accessing. It's not linear, and it's not like climbing a ladder. It's a gyroscopic, absolutely all-encompassing opening, and it's completely unique at every point, but every point is a singular point in the infinite field. And so we experience a sense of a singular point, but when we know that we're unlimited and we're infinite, unbounded, we're simultaneously experiencing the infinite field of possibility and the ecstatic glory of the flow multidimensionally, and we're experiencing that at the singular point. It's like the antenna is receiving it, and this is the treasure of the body, right? The multidimensional body is that we get to experience this in all of these subtle ways that continue to refine and refine. And as the refinement continues to open, it starts to multidimensionally purify and recalibrate and rejuvenate, right? It starts to be able to rejuvenate the physicality. It starts to rejuvenate the sense of the physicality being a mortal body to the recognition of the immortal, right? To recognize that we're not limited within the physicality. We're not a limited being, that we can rejuvenate and light. Okay, as the light codes are coming in, that what is happening is that on a cellular level, there's rejuvenation, like transfiguration that's happening, like bioenergetic renewal is happening. And that is recalibrating on a cellular level so that we start to be able to access the fullness of our consciousness on every level, that we start to be able to access the finer codes that remind us that we're absolutely wired to remember our divinity and to open to a capacity within our human experience of being a living process of refinement that we have no idea with our mind of what is possible. So that's really exciting, right? That's really profound and really glorious. And within our wiring, within our deepest intelligence of our consciousness, we have a certain knowing of this, right? So as the words are coming, just to feel what you're recognizing, what comes alive. And even if it doesn't just all sort of fall into line and like, oh yeah, I get it, I see it. It's just, what's stirring? I recognize that, or just a feeling of, whoa, yeah. I wanna open more to this. Whatever it is, it's just to be completely open and receptive and receive the intelligence of your own consciousness refining and purifying, and the frequencies of the light field that are coming in. And as we join and we amplify, and the frequency field is sending out that holy yes, it just comes back in glorious waves that reveal the love that is here, that unmask what seems to be hidden or hiding, unmasking that which might be in denial. Okay, so what is being spoken right now are the very specific healing frequencies that are in the field right now. So unmasking, revealing what could be in denial, right? And of course, these places can be unconscious patterns of discordance. So we don't actually consciously know how to access these frequencies of fear and doubt and limitation and lack, right? So as we open and we say yes, these in the frequency field, that which is ready to surface just starts to surface. And as the surfacing is happening, the light is illuminating, right? And these places are surfacing. They're surfacing because they can feel the safety. They can feel the frequency that's mirroring the true essence nature. So the purification and the surfacing starts to happen so that the transmutation can happen. And it's not a process of doing, it's a process of yes, right? It's just saying yes and receiving the frequencies, just opening and allowing the field of illumination to just intelligently move, purify, refine, and release. Just absolutely boom, gone. So the frequencies that are being cleared right now are these frequencies of that which that are protected by denial, deep denial, things that we might consciously have tried to push down, that are repressed and suppressed, and things that are unconsciously just protected. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So the frequencies being illuminated right now are the frequencies of shame, the frequencies where there is hidden shame, like unconscious shame, that causes the denial. Mm-hmm. And there's nothing that needs to be done. Sometimes insight or flashes will come, and that's beautiful, but you don't need to understand anything. It's just to allow the intelligence of the light to illuminate, reveal. And what's happening is that the revealing is revealing the love that is that in a way that the frequencies that feel like shame, that have been pushed down into the unconscious, the essence nature is love. And as the light is here, those frequencies, instead of being in denial and pushed down, they start to come forward. They start to come forward. Sometimes as they come forward, they can bring feelings and sensations and stirrings in the field. So if we can stay present with whatever comes forward, they just open, and they're mirrored in the light. The light illuminates the sense of shadow or hiding or denial, and there's just the wide open field and a clearing that happens, that's happening right now, clearing of those patterns. Mm. And there's a naturalness to it. There's an intelligence to it. There's a beauty to it. And there's a revelatory frequency to it, right? It's revealing. It's revelation. It's revealing what is true. And so that revelation is celebration, because it's revealing the integral wholeness, that nothing needs to happen. And it may not be obvious in the moment, but the continued purification and unwinding will happen until the residues of whatever is surfacing have been illuminated and cleared. So the field is just working. It's blessing and embracing and including everything that is ready to release. Mm. So then just resting, the amplification of the silent presence, amplification of the field, just recognizing the field of silent presence, just recognizing the natural deep resting, recognizing just how things are shifting naturally in the field, and there's more openness and a refinement of the frequency, and just a deeper resting, maybe a sense of feeling more calm or peaceful, or a sense of, there can be a sense of being stirred, for sure, because purification can happen if that's the level that the light frequencies will work. But a sense of just realizing more deeply what you are as an intelligent process, as consciousness, as a field of grace, a field of light. Mm. And so in the silence, in the stillness, in the presence of being, we could say that opening to the heart's knowing, where the being knows itself. It's like the doorway, the portal. Of course, there isn't really a doorway or a portal, but it's like an avenue into yourself, into the landscape of consciousness. And we say inner landscape, but of course it's not inside anything. It's actually everywhere. But we access it through the inner sense of presence, the inner sense of being, where the being is in its innermost sense of itself. So the innermost depthful experience of yourself, just being, opens to this wide and free, infinite, boundless landscape of consciousness that is pure. It's the field of light, the field of freedom, the field of being. And you are the being, you are the field. You are the stillness, the silence. You are that which is true and integral and whole. You are the love, the peace, the openness, that which is without condition. And that which knows is that which already is. There's nothing to understand. It's deeper and more subtle than that. And the revelation is immediate. It's yes, here now. And the depth of the revelation will just be according to what can be open to in consciousness. And there's no measure, and there's no comparison, and there's no better or worse. There's just the glory of this moment, just as it is. Mm-hmm. Open to the infinite field of possibility, open to the exploration, open to the wild adventure, opening to the frequency field and all that can be explored here. Mm-hmm. And the exploration is a receiving. It's in the field of presence. That the divinity is the pure, the spotless, the perfect. It's the revelation of the oneness with God. And it starts with the revelation of being a child of God, being one with what God is. The willingness, the openness to not identify with the lack and the sense that there's something wrong with me, and to identify with the sense of the openness and the spark of light presence where the revelation is. The presence of God is here, field of presence. And it's about being present with and as. Not as someone who is present, but presence itself, present to itself, in and as itself, referencing only itself in natural presence. That there's not two here. We could even say there's not you and God, there's only God. There's not you and love, there's only love. And so even the sense of the child of God is the sense of the frequency of God, let's say, recognized in the heart's knowing as a spark in the lived human experience. But as we deepen into this frequency, we open into the remembrance of God consciousness. And as we open to the God consciousness, the refined perception opens to allow us to open to the field, the unified field, where everything is flowing in the knowing of itself. And we start to open to the intelligence of the field flowing in the knowing of itself. And as the field is flowing in the knowing of itself, it flows in the knowing of itself to know itself without referring to itself, and knowing itself in the purity of only God. In a way, it feels itself to be nothing. It feels itself to not actually exist as a thing. It feels itself to just be this, what is. It's not referencing itself in things. It's just what is. And the frequency knowing is the knowing of what God is this that knows itself in an integral wholeness, that doesn't reference itself through consciousness. Its referencing of itself is immediate. It references itself in the purest frequency of the self-sustaining surrender to itself, which is whole, the pure devotion that is whole. It's not referencing itself through the consciousness that is its own creation. It refines through the layers of consciousness to reference the immediacy of itself as what is, just this, just this. So just receiving the frequency field, the light of the frequency field. Just saying yes and allowing the fine frequencies of light, of Siddha light, the grace light to resonate, recalibrate, reorganize, upgrade. There's nothing to know, nothing to understand, nothing to fix or change. Perhaps you can really feel that more deeply now, that there's only this, just this, just this. That this is the field of light, and the field of light is the same as the field of bliss. And the bliss nectar in the knowing of itself nourishes itself. It's as if the nectarine flows get finer and finer and sweeter and sweeter. And it's just about sipping on the sweetness. Sipping on the sweetness through just being here, just like this. Sipping on the frequency of God, of the eternal God. Sipping on the sweetness of the frequency of God, like a baby taking milk from the mother, right? Deep, eternal nourishment. You start to see the incredible functioning, right, of intelligence. How the mother nourishes the child. How the glory of pure light nourishes its rays, its beams, right? Keeps them radiant, keeps every single light beam absolutely radiant. Not as a diminished or dimmed version, but in absolute fullness, full radiance, full wholeness. That wholeness does not ever divide. There's no diminished version of wholeness. That wholeness is what is integral and pure, always, eternally. That's forever, right? It's power, it's force, it's truth, it's life, it's the glory, the revelatory, celebratory wholeness, the undivided. So just receiving and resting that that which knows is a field of knowing that is flowing within itself. There's nothing to do or understand. The field is miraculous. The field is timeless, eternal, and silent. Receiving the light. The light is the pure light of consciousness, which is the Christ consciousness, the Christ light, right? The child of God. Is one with what God is. And so the glory, the shining glory in the heart. And just receiving the clean slate of the eternal now. Nothing behind you, nothing in front of you, just this, just this. Total release from the karmic system of looping and repeating the patterns. Total release in this moment into the presence of now and just this. Freedom. Freedom from mind. freedom from the sense of division and separation, freedom from past and future, and freedom to just be your glorious self, fearless as a frequency of love, as a frequency of undivided wholeness, and to receive the grace of the flow of life and its radiant intelligence, and to just allow the unmasking and the revealing of the undivided in every moment that feels to be divided. Be the light that illuminates the truth and the reality. And as we illuminate the truth and the reality, we open to the frequency of that which is the glory of reality. We could say the reality is the frequency of heaven, the frequency of that which has never divided. And that it's right here in our lived experience. And it's just about resonating at the frequency of the undivided glory. And the lived experience resonating here, right? It's all about perspective of seeing and the frequency that is alive as a result of the refined perception of the consciousness. As we illuminate that which keeps us bound and open to the boundless freedom, the infinite field of grace and possibility, where there's no knowing. We can't create a dependable sense of future, because all future can only be created out of the context of past, which is fear. We cannot know anything, and it's to come to a comfort in the sense of the unknown, and to feel the true safety of now, the true safety of what is. That it's not a safety that the mind wants to hold on to, but it's a safety of being at the frequency of love that is open receptivity. And when we're living and creating from here, we're creating at the frequency of love, of the glory. And the heart just knows this. The heart recognizes there's a song of creative intelligence, of divine flow, of inspiration and grace. So just resting here and receiving the glory of the field of transmission, of light, of bliss, of divine nourishment, of the mother's milk, right? The sweetness, the sukha.